Dr. Bruce Ivans was a soft-spoken Army microbiologist whose life would be folded into one of the most chilling and unresolved crimes in American history. The year was 2001. A nation already reeling from the attacks of September 11th was forced to look inward as anonymous envelopes dusted with dry anthrax spores began to arrive at newsrooms and on Capitol Hill. In October, a photo editor in Florida became the first to die. Weeks later, chills moved up through the postal system, mailrooms closed, Senate offices evacuated, postal workers quarantined. 5 people ultimately lost their lives, 17 were infected. The letters were ordinary enough to pass through the system, brown envelopes, crude typewritten notes, but inside they carried Ames strain Bacillus anthracis, a lethal powder cultured and weaponized in a laboratory setting. The FBI launched Amerithrax, a sprawling investigation that would pull at the seams of the American biodefense community. Early suspicions landed on a scientist, Dr. Stephen Hatfill, whose life was publicly unspooled and ruined before the government acknowledged its error. He later received a multi-million-dollar settlement. The hunt then focused on Bruce Ivans, a civilian researcher at the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USMRID, at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Ivans had intimate knowledge of anthrax, worked late nights, and had access to strains used by the military. The FBI's genetic forensics traced the spores to a family of isolates that included material stored at USMRID. Investigators argued that a unique genetic signature linked the mailed anthrax to a flask under Ivans' control. In 2008, as the FBI prepared charges, Ivans died of an apparent suicide. 2 years later, in 2010, the Department of Justice announced it had solved the case. Ivans, they said, acted alone. But the announcement did not end the story. Scientists and independent reviewers raised persistent doubts. The National Academy of Sciences convened a panel that concluded the genetic evidence could not unequivocally tie the mailed spores to Ivans' flask. The methods then available were not definitive enough to exclude other sources. Evidence gaps, questions about lab access logs, and inconsistent timelines left the public with unnerving possibilities. Was the FBI's conclusion careful closure or a rushed explanation to satisfy a terrified nation? The conspiracy in this documentary horror is not only the act itself, but the institutional choreography that followed, the searing of reputations, the strain on forensic science, and a federal agency pushed by fear and politics into a narrative that some say simplified a darker, more complex truth. Was a single scientist driven to lethal action by hidden motives? Or did systemic failures, lax controls, widespread use of an Ames strain in many labs, national panic, create the conditions for a crime that could not be neatly boxed? Families of the dead and the sick demanded answers. Postal workers asked why protections had lagged. Journalists scrutinized the government's timeline. The Amerithrax case exposed vulnerabilities in biodefense and the peril of certainty when the science still hummed with uncertainty. It left a country that had just learned how fragile its sense of safety could be, exposed to invisible threats moving through familiar channels. Today, the envelopes are archived evidence, the buildings sterilized, and the labs tighter. Yet the fear that a shadow of doubt can outlive an official statement remains. The horror of the anthrax letters lived not just in the spores, but in the silence after the verdict. Unanswered questions about who sent them, what else might have been possible inside those labs, and whether justice had been fully served. The Amerithrax story is a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying conspiracies are not lurid fantasies, but the slow unspooling of mistakes, assumptions, and a rush for closure when the truth is still fragile.